friends and neighbors, Dr. Umhau Wolf. Dr. Wolf has been a person who has shared with us in his writings. He's an author. He has been a parish pastor. He's been a seminary professor and a college professor, and been involved in all types of discussion with people of the faith expressions in our community. He's lived here in Austin, but he's also lived in the state of Ohio and Toledo, and I think he has something to tell us about what we can do in the Austin community to continue to grow in relationship with our neighbor and their faith. Umhau, welcome to Austin Faith Dialogue.
Thanks, Carl.
Good to have you here. Let's talk a little bit about your experiences ecumenically. You come out of a family of clergy persons. You're a third-generation clergy. Where did you get this idea of discussing and being able to take the risk of talking about faith with people around you?
Well, it really started with my father talking with Interfaith, which was Missouri Synod, and his synod. They didn't always talk together back in the 20s and the 30s, and they'd get excited when somebody would say, maybe we're going to get somewhere and start talking and be friends again. And that keeps going up and down. So it isn't just interfaith, it's with interdenominational.
You had that kind of model from your father then. He encouraged you to do that type of thing.
Right, he surely did.
And as you continued your education and you started getting involved in leadership positions within your particular denomination, how did you experience your neighbor's faith? Where were some of the first experiences you had?
Well, the first thing was when I went to graduate school in Hartford, Connecticut. And there was a mission school there as well as a theology school. And in the mission school were missionaries, but there were also many people who were of the other faiths. So I met a number of Muslims. I first learned to study the Quran over there at that time. And of course I had known Hebrew and the Hebrew Bible for years from back in seminary back in the 30s. And this was right before the war, at the beginning of the 40s. And that's how it started. And I also got into the black and white. I didn't know much about black-white relationships until there because my children, my oldest two children, were in the nursery school there, and lots of black.
What I'm thinking is the ecumenical interfaith dialogue discussion often comes from missionary experience. Is there any truth to that? The missionary people interact with one another, discuss with one another?
I think you find it's the same with missionaries as it is with ordinary human beings, if I can put it that way. You got both sides. I know some missionaries who hate every other denomination and they play like rivals, as if they were two General Motors and Chrysler fighting out for turf.
Right.
But then I've known others who do as you do, and as we're talking about, who talk and they learn from the people that they're going to. Of course, our denomination, as you know, we gave up already back in the 30s or late 20s, Jewish missions. We haven't quite figured out what to do with the Muslim yet. I'm trying to get it to take the same kind of stand that we have toward Jewish missions, but I'm a minority of 1.5.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the relationship between Christian faith community, Jewish faith community, and Muslim faith community. But first I'd like to, what about Christians and the dialogue between Christians? How have you seen a change? You mentioned that you were in school in the 40s and went into your first parish maybe in the 40s, is that correct?
No, I went to the first parish in the 30s, 1937. I'm a little older, do you think?
You sure look young, Umhau. What's the change then, okay, that you started in parish ministry in 37, now it's 1995. What has happened? Where's the development been?
The big development has been that in my seminary and my father's seminary, anybody who wasn't a Lutheran was a heretic. Such things as unionism, which meant that you went and had a church service in somebody else's church that wasn't your same denomination, was taboo. My father gave an example of that, but so did one of my seminary professors. Any church that'll invite me, they both said, I'll go preach as long as they don't put any constraints around what I say. And my father got lots of backlashes because he spoke at a city park that was run by the Council of Churches program on Sunday mornings before most services started. And I heard that and saw
early on there was kind of this tension within denominations themselves.
Yes. Other Lutherans thought my father was a liberal. I thought he was a conservative, but that's a point of view.
That's right, a son may think that about a father. As you developed through in the 40s and 50s, where did you see the changes come between Roman Catholics and Methodists and Lutherans, and what was kind of the push to bring about change and interfacing with one another?
Well, the Lutherans were very slow in belonging to councils of churches. We were the only ones in Toledo for a number of years who belonged to the Council of Churches. My predecessor I'd gotten into that. Dr. Micah Felder, who's a rather famous name for people who are old, he got us into that. But even he, at his beginning, he was against it, and he particularly was anti-Unitarian, which we had wonderful Unitarian pastors in Toledo and still do.
Why do you think there was that feeling of being against ecumenical discussions?
I think the real reason was insecurity. I still think that. That insecurity about ourselves, about if I hear something else, you know, even Republicans and Democrats are as insecure as Lutherans and Catholics were. So it's the same. It's the same ball game. So you try to hang on to what you got, because that's my blanket. That's my blanket.
Are you saying to Austin Faith Dialogue people who are watching this program, saying, if you are secure, then you're able to talk with other people about your faith?
You're able to talk with them. That's important. Many people talk at them and call it dialogue.
All right.
I've been to some of those meetings.
So it is really, if there's going to be an ecumenical spirit between denominations, there has to be a respect for one another.
Yeah, one of the first things that I learned back in the late 40s in Toledo, Monsignor Doyle became a friend of mine, and we worked on a lot of social projects together, the way you are so active in social projects now. And Monsignor Doyle said, the one thing I like about you, Umhau, is you know where you stand. And I think if I know where I stand, I'm secure, and Monsignor Doyle and somebody else might know. That's true of my Jewish and my Muslim friends, too. The same thing. They know where I stand, and they know what I don't advocate.
For those who are watching the program today, I'm wondering, where could you suggest, as one who's been involved in ecumenical spirit, where could you suggest that people stand when it comes to their tradition?
Well, I stand for my tradition, and when somebody asks, what do you believe in salvation, or how are you going to be saved, or will you be damned or not, I tell them I know what I know about me. But only God knows what you know, how will be saved or won't be saved. It's not up to me to say, you're in that little cubby hole and I'm in this little cubby hole, and we'll be saved but you won't, or vice versa. Somebody gave me in one of my classes I'm teaching now, gave me 2 weeks ago, something they picked up at the city garage sale. It had on a cubicle, sweet cubicle.
And that's security.
And that's security, whether you're working
sometimes religion can be that kind of security, so that we realize that we have this opportunity, that I'll stay in my cubicle, you stay in your cubicle. But it seems to me, Umhau, that history's not allowing us to stay in our cubicles.
Exactly.
That our cubicles are banging up against one another. You told me a great story before we came on the air about an interfacing experience, I guess that's the way we talk in the jargon of today, with a Roman Catholic bishop. You were in Toledo, and tell the audience that story, because that's a great story about how growth came.
Yeah, Bishop Raring was the bishop in Toledo at the time. I was the pastor of the largest Lutheran church there. We decided, my congregation and I, decided we'd have a Catholic, Lutheran, Protestant, ecumenical institute, we called it, in our congregation. We invited Gus Weigel, who was the famous Jesuit who was thinking in terms of dialogue long before anybody was...
And this is back in the 50s, right?
Yeah, this was back in the 50s, or mid-50s.
All right.
And Gus Weigel came in from New York, where and he was a great guy. I had known him, read several of his books. And so we had a good time. We had a great number we had 120-some people there, including almost 50% Roman Catholic priests. The following day, the Blade reported it. The day after, they reported how wonderful all these priests and Lutherans and Methodists and Episcopalians were getting together. The bishop got the reporter and sent a notice around to all his bishops that they were not allowed to attend anymore. Well, as newspaper reporters and maybe TV reporters do, they like to get a fight going. And so they saw one that might be there. And so they came over the next day after he put this out, and they put it in their paper. They came over and interviewed me. And I said, well, Bishop Raring is the bishop of his flock. He has the right to lay the orders down, ask them to follow the rules. And I said, in due time, the Holy Spirit will take care of that. We'll figure it out. This was, of course, long before Vatican II, but it wasn't over a year later that he invited me to come over to his headquarters, and we became very good friends, just talking. About 2 years later, he lifted the ban, And if you want me to get to the close...
Well, yeah, that's the key, I think, what is important, because the cubicle opened up. That's what I think is important.
Right, the cubicle opened up. When I came down in 1966 here to Austin, I went back to Toledo one time for a 125th anniversary of my parish, and I preached. When I got back here after that visit, there was a letter from Bishop Raring. It said in this simple way, a few other things were in it, but he said, "I thought we were friends, and I hear you were in Toledo and you didn't visit me." Now, he had retired by that time. He was living on the campus where I taught not too long ago at Lourdes College, and the nuns and sisters were taking good care of him. So the next time I was up in Toledo, I made an effort to get over and see the bishop. We had a wonderful summer afternoon just sitting on the porch of the place that was now his home. And we talked over all the times, even some of the fights and how wonderful things are now, especially since the Vatican, this was in the 70s, since Vatican II was long gone. And I'm afraid it's long gone in other ways too, but that's another issue. But we had a wonderful time, and the best thing about it is, it really makes me feel good just telling you the story, because he was dead within a couple of months of that time.
Yeah. That's the kind of growth, I think, Umhau, we can experience when we come out of our cubicle, when we open up to one another. And that's what we're talking about here on Austin Faith Dialogue through the years, to open up to each other and to realize that our neighbor's faith can enrich our lives and bless our lives as we share this time together. We're going to take a short break and tell you about Austin Metropolitan Ministries and how you can participate in your neighbor's faith as we make this a better place to live for all of us. And then we're going to come back and talk with Dr. Wolf about interfaith and discussion with our Jewish friends and our Muslim friends. Stay with us on Austin Faith Dialogue.
Serving Austin means serving you. That has always been the primary goal of Austin Metropolitan Ministries. We are religion in action through the work of these organizations. Each plays a key role in making the capital city a better place to live, but we can't do it alone. Do you have some spare time, talents, or any resources that you can share? If you do, please call AMM at 472-7627, because serving Austin means serving you.
Thanks for coming back with us on Austin Faith Dialogue. People of the Christian community frequently struggle in relating to one another, and Dr. Wolf has shared with us on this program that opportunity for us to grow in relationship with one another and the benefits that come to us when we do share that time in our faith with one another, as we respect one another and as we learn from one another and as we participate in this walk together. You may have been wondering why I have this in my hands. It's not a Bible, although maybe I should have the Bible, and some of them people may think of it as a Bible, but it's my calendar, and when I look through this calendar day after day, I realize that, well, people of the faith community have their calendars, and some of the things that people of the faith community have been experiencing in their calendar had been for the Christian community the season of Lent and Holy Week. And Dr. Wolf has been involved with both the Muslim community and the Jewish community and some of their observances. And Umhau, one of the observances of the Jewish community of faith is that of Passover. Share with those who are watching, our neighbors here in the Austin community, share with them some of the realities and messages of the Passover for the Jewish community of faith.
You know, as your congregation did and as we did in Toledo, we sometimes have a pseudo Seder service with a Passover service.
And I think that's important, pseudo.
Yes.
Because it's not really a Seder.
It's not a Seder at all. It's just an educational attempt.
Right.
But I think the real purpose of that is that even Lutherans can learn from that kind of thing by recognizing what it's trying to say about deliverance. The word is deliverance more than anything. Redemption is another word that's used in Hebrew as well as deliverance. But it seems to me that's the trials and the difficulties of the Israelite community getting through the wilderness is the major issue of the Passover. And then remember that. And the word remember is almost a holy word in the Hebrew scriptures. Mm-hmm. Remember the days of your youth. But then why do we remember this night? And why is this night so different from all the others is one of the great children's questions in that service. And it seems to me that's to remind the children of the Jewish family, but also of those of us who do it. Why did this happen and why should we celebrate? Why is this the greatest night in all of history.
That's one of the things I've really respected about the Jewish community of faith as I visited with our rabbis in this community and had them on Austin Faith Dialogue talking about the Passover, Umhau, is that it is really an instructional tool for the family, for the parent and the child to interact with one another and to remember their history.
Yeah.
And in that remembering of history, they grow into learning who they are, their identity.
Exactly.
What are some of the experiences you've had with the Jewish community of faith?
Well, I guess it started when I was even still in junior high school, and then I went to high school. I was the only of 2 Gentiles in my high school class. All the rest were Jewish. My 2 best friends were very Jewish for the 4 years of high school.
Where were you in that time? Where were you living?
I was living in Baltimore, Maryland, and that leads into my next experience that I think I told you earlier. I think I might be, I'm not bragging, I'm just saying it as a fact, that I might be the first Lutheran clergyman to speak and preach at the regular Sabbath service of a Reformed temple.
And I think what was interesting is that when you did that,
Well, I did that in 1943.
when World War II was raging.
Right, when I had just gotten home from the service but was not just discharged. I had another year before they discharged me from active service.
Right.
So Morris Lazarin, who and I became friends, he was about my father's age, so it was a peculiar combination, but his synagogue wasn't too far from where I had a headquarters.
What have you grown to realize as a person of the Christian faith community, the benefit of being involved with the Jewish faith community in dialogue? What have you received from that?
Well, I've received a lot of information about what I know, I should have known as a student of Hebrew. I've learned lots more about the contours and the context of Hebrew words that I didn't know. One of my best Jewish professors at Ralph Marcus at the University of Chicago helped me to see. He ran a course. A Jewish practicing Jew ran a course at the University of Chicago on the interpretation of Paul. And that was an eye-opener. I learned more about Paul than I did in any of my seminary classes.
For those of the Christian faith community, it's maybe good to remember that Paul was a Jew.
Yes.
You know, and how indebted we are.
And he used more than just Greek.
Yes, right. The concepts, the relationship with God. What are also some of the risks that are involved for people of the Jewish faith community and for people of the Christian community?
The biggest risk that I've seen, and it was happening just about the time I finished my term on the National Lutheran Jewish Dialogue Group. There were 9 of each faith. All 3 of the major Lutherans and all 3 of the major Jewish were represented on that group. And just about the end of my time, it began to get where we're seeing it now, where land became a theological question.
What do you mean?
Well, Shamir, of course, made it stronger than anybody, although Golda Meir, whom Betty interviewed us a couple of times on TV, was saying that it's a greater Israel kind of concept, so that Judah and Samaria and Israel should all be together, and that becomes a religious issue rather than a political issue for many. And one time we had, that was the only time we had a very difficult, because even the Jews didn't agree on this as to where it was, although Abraham Heschel, who was against that point of Judaism for a while, finally after the 73 war, converted, if I could say that word, and became less concerned about that. But that's the only issue that we've had, because for Christians to understand that the land is a religious issue, we're understanding it a little bit more as we see what's happening when ethnics get into the Yugoslav issue. That that's not just religious, it's not just Muslim, Orthodox, and Catholic. It's got some more going on it.
From those days in your junior high experience to your days in the mid-40s when you preached and were there in that worship service in Baltimore, to 1995, where have these discussions between Christians and Jews gone, and what is the future of that kind of dialogue from your perspective?
From my perspective, they've gone quite far for the people who were willing to go. I can't walk with another person if they don't want to walk with me. But for those of us who've been in the dialogue, even with that little thing that I just mentioned that upset some of the people, making it into a more religious issue. But of course, that's also among evangelical Christians an issue.
Right.
So that we have trouble. I think it's going very well for people who are willing to listen and people who are able to share.
But what you said about Christian dialogue between the denominations is certainly true also in the interfaith between Christians and Jews, that whole respect for one another. And you would suggest that we begin by recognizing that we're not involved in trying to convert one another.
That's right. And it's in 1929, the synod my father belonged to and that I belonged to, and then the one followed, they gave up Jewish missions. They don't give any funding for it. The last time I found in my father's diary any gift from his congregation was in the middle 20s to what was called Jewish missions in those
Why
days.
do you think your father and the Christians in that day and time in the 20s came to recognize that that is something that we should not be involved in?
Well, I think Dad's point of view was that, first of all, it wasn't worth wasting the money because both Jewish people and Muslims are not easily converted, especially today. But I think the second reason was that we're all brothers of the faith, sisters of the faith. In the Quran, of course, they're the three people of the book. You know, all of them except the Hebrew Bible, whether you're Muslim or whether you're Catholic, and obviously when you're Jewish. And that's important to see that.
To recognize and respect that they are people of the Bible as we are people of the Bible,
exactly.
and that together we live in community with one another. Also, where does this Passover theme of freedom and deliverance fit in, do you think, to that whole idea of respecting those of another faith community, such as the Jewish faith community?
Well, I think we recognize that all of us had our own wildernesses to go through, whether we talk denominationally or we talk family or even ethnic groups. So we've all had that need. We haven't had it quite as dramatic, and it hasn't been recorded in Holy Scriptures the way that has. But for the Muslim, that same thing happened, and they celebrate the kind of thing in the various times when people need to take their Hajj, their pilgrimage, because of Muhammad's flight. And so they reenact it, just like we do in Lent, sometimes the 40 days. You know, like I said before, that remembrance is a holy word. 40 is a holy number.
Yes, it is.
In many of these groups of people.
You mentioned a number of times about your dialogue and interfaith experiences with the Muslims. Tell us about how that started, and where has that been going for you, and where do you think Christians and Muslims are in that?
Well, let me start where you started. I first became acquainted with the Quran in graduate school. I learned to read the Quranic Arabic. I had a doctor missionary who taught it, and I enjoyed it. And after that, I began visiting a number of synagogues, and I've written a number of articles about the synagogues and the mosques of Midwest. And I've spoken at the Islamic Center in Washington, D.C., the year it was first consecrated. So that keeps going. But what really does it is I went to many brotherhood meetings in synagogues. That used to be February. I don't know whether it still is or not, but it's now been taken over. February is really racial, Negro honoring
Black History Month.
Black History Month, yeah. But I think that's where that started. Every year I'd go to the temple and speak or listen to, maybe twice a year I'd listen to somebody. But the other thing is, in 1954, I began being invited to the mosque in Toledo. And I spoke to them at least once a year from 54 to 66. And I was invited to their new dedication later when it came up, and I was just there for the Islamic Center of Ohio having their annual meeting, and I was their speaker last November. So I think it's going very well from the Muslim and the, oh, I hate to say liberal, that's a horrible word, but I don't consider myself liberal, but everybody else calls me one. But I think for the people who are willing to listen, a Muslim neighbor, and we lived among them in Toledo as well, as a Jewish neighbor. We had Jewish neighbors and Muslim neighbors all around us in the same block where we lived in the parsonage. And it was a wonderful experience to go and My wife learned Arabic cooking at preparing the wedding there, but she also, she still goes with 3 Jewish women who are in a club she was in from our neighborhood that dates back to 1955,
Yeah,
and they still meet. Sadie Lieberman, that's Jewish enough for you, I think,
right.
for people to know, and Betty get together regularly. They talk over the phone probably more than she talks to anybody else.
Well, you know what I see in you is a person that your entire life has been filled with experiences, great experiences, exciting experiences, archaeology.
Hope they're not over yet.
And I think that's the point. And I think as we continue to share with our neighbors and grow in that faith, that we'll learn from one another. And you mentioned it starts from that willingness to listen to one another.
Yes, that's
that
the
willingness
main
to
thing.
respect one another and to share. If you were going to sum it all up, not that it's over, Umhau, but if you're going to sum it up, you're looking at those interfaith ecumenical experiences, what is a word that would describe it all for you?
Challenge. It would be a challenge to just be able to recognize I'm still who I am, and that doesn't prevent me from letting them be what they want to be.
I think that sounds right. And I think that's really the invitation to all of us, that we have the opportunity to experience the challenge in our life. As our city changes, as we have the opportunity to see people, we grow together in faith and commitment to one another and walk together. As Dr. Wolf has said, let's walk together in this community and make this a better place to live. Thanks so much for being with us on Austin Faith Dialogue, and we hope for you that you'll continue to enjoy living your faith and sharing your faith. Peace be with you.
For more information, call Austin Metropolitan Ministries at 472-7627.